Okay, yes, thank you. Yeah, so I mentioned it's the source for this entire, it's a large body of work that I actually made most of it in Los Angeles, which is where I was living before coming to Cleveland. And the source is it's a 13th century English apocalypse manuscript, which from the collection of the Getty Museum in LA. So I encountered it in LA and kind of became obsessed with the images. There's like 82 illustrations in this book. And in the 13th century in England, apocalypse manuscripts were like all the rage. It was like this very popular art form, kind of like a comic book. I mean, that's how it related, I kind of related to it as like, this is a 13th century comic book, but it's like telling the story of the book of Revelation. So it's this, which I didn't really know anything about. I wasn't raised, going to church or anything. Like it was just the images that I became compelled by. And they're really crazy. Like the scenes are just wild. It's like a surrealist comic book, basically. And I sat with it for a few years not knowing what to do with it. But living in LA is kind of like actually physically experiencing apocalyptic climate change. And so I finally realized I needed to do something with this material. Because when I moved to LA, I felt like in my body I experienced like physically, like the situation we're in, ecologically, in a way that I had intellectually understood, for many years and had read a lot about and had been in reading groups and, kind of trying to intellectually process, but it was like, okay, this is physically happening in my body. And so what I decided to do was take that material, those images, which I was so drawn to, that tell this story that, in a lot of ways, like the way I started to think about the source was like, oh, it's this narrative that we've kind of inherited in the modern West, at least, like whether or not we have a direct relationship to the Book of Revelation or Christianity, it's an underlying narrative that like permeates Hollywood films and basically popular culture and the way that we think about time and like inevitability of certain things. And so I wanted to like take that story and make it physical with my own hands, and and then to manipulate it or change it in some way to like. I was thinking a lot about like the sort of linear time in that story, and so what I ended up doing was, sort of communing with the material, copying it very carefully. And then cutting it up into these diamonds so that it could be completely just spun around and become this kind of nonlinear structure, essentially. So that is what I did, and it was kind of an obsessive, crazy process that I engaged in for a few years, and created a large body of work. And I hadn't really shown it before, and so when I was thinking about this project, before I knew I was going to be curating a group show at Zygote, I was applying for a grant, satellite fund grant. Over a year ago, I finally sat down and wrote about it, and then kind of, hopefully that addresses your question, but just to like kind of elaborate further on how that sort of led to this show is that I partnered with Zygote and they encouraged me to bring in other artists, and then I thought, okay, yeah, that actually feels like it would be really exciting to kind of just like take all the reflections I've done on writing about this body of work and understanding the importance of the sort of process, the ritualistic process that I was engaging with to transform that material or kind of take it through my body, to find something else on the other side of that. Like what other artists, what works would I like to put that in dialogue with, essentially. And it really kind of spun into this whole other, I never would have been able to anticipate what that would lead to, but that's kind of how the show came about.
Can I ask, I'm curious, are those two of a larger group then?
Yeah, so the very large painting, there's a few of that size.
Uh-huh.
And then I made those 2 smaller ones for this show, so those are newer ones. But there's other small works as well. Yeah.
Because it sounded like you had a lot of material to work with
Mm-hmm.
from this book.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's still plenty more that I can
Yeah.
work with. Yeah. Yeah. But I paused on making that work to kind of like Lisa. I'm like got my hands in a lot of pots, and I have to sort of like put things away because my studio is not that big, and sort of focus on one type of technique or approach at a time. Yeah.
And what you said you copied the source, do you mean like copied by hand or photocopied? Or?
Copy by yeah, so that's a good question. No, so I actually gridded it out. I like use like a very traditional sort of method for scaling it up. Like putting a grid on the source material, then gridding my paper. So it's ink on paper. And like pencil drawing the whole thing. Like I felt like I wanted to actually in certain ways be very true to the source, or to like really understand it and see it and know what it was. Kind of like you were saying, drawing your own paintings. Like until you draw something or look at it really closely, you don't really see it. And that's my experience. And so yeah, it was a copying by hand.
I would say they were like full painting, drawing. They were beautiful.
I
It's probably
just
not.
like,
It's
yeah.
probably not okay for me to say like a lot of
No,
loss.
this is totally great.
She went and like just cut everything up. I was like, but that was my favorite one.
Well, it's true.
Did you save at least one?
I do have a couple,
Okay.
but that's partly why I stopped making that work. It was a hard process to go through actually, because I was destroying something I spent a long time on. But I was making something else, and that was the conceptual sort of process.